All right, it's 5:03. Maybe I'll get us going, Keri.
Sounds good.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to The Good Acre. This is The Good Acre from home. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank everyone for choosing to join us tonight. My name is Anna Richardson. I recognize some names on the list, so some of you may recognize me. I'm the programs director at The Good Acre. For those of you who may be less familiar, The Good Acre is a nonprofit food hub, and our mission is to connect and strengthen farmers, food makers, and the community through good food. We do this through various programs, which include a 500-member farm share, of which some of you are members, a local produce wholesale program, warehousing, and one-on-one grower support services. Also in our facility, we operate a shared use kitchen program that's home to over a dozen local food makers, as well as a culinary training program that's new, that focuses on helping K-12 schools learn scratch cooking techniques with locally grown produce. Up until recently, we also had a robust cooking class programming, and I know some of you got to take classes in our kitchen, which is where this Discover series comes from. So in lieu of gathering in our classroom this evening, we continue to do these informational and educational events online at no cost, allowing, we hope, even more people to participate. We're glad to have you all here with us as we try to explore this new way of building community and sharing knowledge in a pandemic. To everyone who made a donation when registering, thanks so much. Your support helps to fund all of the work we do here and allows us to continue offering this kind of programming in the future. If you have questions as we go along, please do put them in the Q&A box. You should see a link for that at the bottom of your Zoom window. And one of our TGA staff will be monitoring that Q&A. So we'll do our best to answer your questions in the Q&A portion of tonight's event, which will be at the end after Keri goes through her slides. So with that said, I'd like to introduce you to our topic and our speaker tonight. We at the Good Acre often use the State Fair to describe where the Good Acre is located because it's such a conspicuous neighbor. So we're thrilled to have a representative from the fair down the block to share with us tonight. So without further ado, Keri Huber has worked at the Minnesota State Fair as an archivist for the past 10 years. With over 23,000 photos in the State Fair's collection, her background in visual arts has proven useful in finding images that tell a story and bring history to life. She collaborates with the Minnesota Historical Society and has worked with various TPT programs and national programs such as Bizarre Foods with Andrew Zimmern, which some of you may have seen. She's been interviewed by local television and radio stations and newspapers about the State Fair and enjoys sharing her knowledge of the State Fair through presentations such as this one. So we're lucky to have Keri with us tonight, and I'll let you take it away, Keri. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you for having me and welcome everybody. I know that this is not the same as actually being at the Minnesota State Fair, but hopefully we can have a wonderful time and learn some things. So let's see if get this together. Is everyone able to see the presentation all right?
I can see it great, Keri.
Okay, and then do you see the thing above? I'm very new at this, so excuse me. I've never done a Zoom presentation before.
Doing great.
Great, okay.
Some of the panelists have said they can see it too, so it looks like we're on our way. Awesome.
So with the Minnesota State Fair being over 160 years old, there's so much that I can tell you. However, with about an hour worth, I have to shorten it down. So I'm going to be talking about the early parts of the State Fair, agriculture and livestock, various buildings, competitions, and then we'll get at the end a little bit of more of the entertainment side of the State Fair. And so here's the storied history of the Minnesota State Fair told through images. And now let's see. And again, excuse me if anything goes on. This is new for me as a presentation. So the early years from its inception as a territorial fair to finding permanent fairgrounds. So the Minnesota State Fair actually started as a territorial agricultural society, which was founded in 1854. And in 1855, they had their first fair, which was held in Minneapolis. And in this map, I highlighted all the different cities that the State Fair was held at. So in 1858, Minnesota became a state, but there weren't enough funds for the State Fair to go on. And so 1859 was technically our first state fair, and that was held in Minneapolis. And they also jumped it from Fort Snelling to Red Wing, Rochester, Winona, St. Paul, and Owatonna. And again, there was never a permanent fairgrounds, and so they would kind of just from year to year decide where they would be held. An example of one of the early state fairs was in 1860 at Fort Snelling. An example of what the fairgrounds they believe would have been in this area in Red Wing from 1864. Kitsendale Driving Park. So this is actually a St. Paul area, and the fairgrounds was held here for quite a few years. And you can see it's actually very near the current state fairgrounds. The area highlighted in red is Kitsendale, and the area highlighted in green is the Ramsey County Poor Farm. And the Ramsey County Poor Farm is our permanent fairgrounds now, but Kitsendale is actually about where Hamlin, Snelling, and Interstate 94 is today. And so it's actually very close by. Minneapolis, here's an illustration of what the fairgrounds looked like in 1877. And then we have some posters of Minnesota State Fair in Rochester, and then Owatonna. And here's an example of Owatonna's fairgrounds in 1883 and 1884. So with being the state fair that was jumping around for all these years, it was really important to find a permanent place to have a fairgrounds to show that Minnesota was a great place to build your family and make it permanent. And so in order to also make the state fair better than it already was, having that permanent home would allow you to create buildings specifically for a state fair. And so here it is, 1885, our permanent fairgrounds to be midway between St. Paul and Minneapolis. So St. Paul and Minneapolis as the Twin Cities, both of them wanted this permanent fairgrounds in their city and didn't want to share with the other. But being at the Ramsey County Poor Farm, it was offered to the fair for free, and it was perfect because it literally is midway. And it was known as the Hamlin Township at the time. And you can see in this poster, it doesn't even mention Hamlin. It's just saying that we're midway between St. Paul and Minneapolis. So now that we have our permanent fairgrounds, we can start building. So this is 5 years after we had the permanent fairgrounds. And you can see this is looking east, kind of if you were on Como Avenue today. And if you look closer up, that picture is of the grandstand, one of the two original wooden grandstands. And to the left are stock barns, for the stables for the horse races. And then on the right-hand side, you have that large domed building is the main or agricultural building, and then the stock barns are in the foreground. And you can see it's a lot more sparse than it is today. And now that we have our permanent fairgrounds, I want to talk about agriculture and horticulture, the main reason why the state fair began. So here's a picture of the main building from 1900. This is, again, that agricultural building that was built in 1885, and you would have seen a lot of various exhibits, but this would have been seen for miles because not much was built back then, and it was painted a gleaming white, and it was just a real beautiful structure to see. One of the things you'd see inside there is the county booths. So here's an example of one of the wings where you would see the county booths on either side. As close up is an Atkin County booth, and you can see all the various types of vegetables and grasses that were farmed in that community. And here's one from the Norman County booth from 1913. And here's Roseau County from 1914 as well. And what I wanted to talk about with Roseau is that Roseau is very close to the Canadian border. And for county booths, they would have competitions that you would have northern, central, and southern counties competing for their zones. And if you won three first places out of 5 years, you would win a silver trophy that you could keep permanently, which was around $150 at the time. And this is a premium book from 1914. And one of the things that they were looking for is like grains, 15 varieties, corn and ears, 6 varieties, native or wild grasses, 20 samples at least, tame grasses and clovers, different types of forage, potato varieties, stock vegetables, culinary, fresh fruits, fruits in glass that can't be shown fresh, and miscellaneous and beauty of exhibits. And because they performed so well, they actually got a lot of advertising in newspapers. And the person who puts the exhibits on mentioned that so many people were coming to Roseau because of what they saw at the state fair. And so even though it takes a lot of work to put all these exhibits together, and it's not something that you make money off of necessarily, but it's a lot. I read even a farmer said, it's the pride of growing it yourself. It's the pride of your fair. It's the pride of your farm. And I thought that was really special. And I definitely feel that is continued on today. We have a seed corn demonstration from 1913. So, we always want to have entertainment at the state fair, but it's educational as well. And so they're showing how to select different seed corn. And from there, you might have received something like this, which is burlap that shows how to test seed corn. And so you would take different kernels from different ears and then see which ones would germinate, which ones might get moldy or things like that. And so which ones you would want to propagate in the future. Here's an example of what the horticulture looked like back in the day. So here's in 1903. And what's similar in today's state fair is how, fruits and vegetables are plated for exhibit. And we have a state capitol in 1906. So again, we're always about having that entertainment factor. There was the St. Paul growers and the Minneapolis growers. They competed with one another. For 1906, St. Paul created the state capitol out of onions with all the various vegetables in the foreground. And Minneapolis created Minnehaha Falls. So you can see in the center, those onions are cascading over the vegetables. Between the two of them, St. Paul won that year. They happen to say it's because the Capitol was a new building, and so everybody was really interested in that. Both happen to be beautiful, and again, showcases what the cities have to offer and what they can grow. Here's a fruit packing demonstration from 1913. As the Goodacre mentioned, they are just next to the state fair, and so is the University of Minnesota. And so we have had that long connection with them. This packing demonstration not only shows how you can visually have your fruits look good, but also pack them well so they won't be bruised. And so again, it's a lot of learning, things that you can take home to your farm and teach people who may not have been able to come to the state fair. Here's another example of the State Fruit Breeding Farm from 1913. One of the things that the university has done is presented the Harrelson apple was first exhibited at the state fair in 1922. And I think other fruits have through the years as well. And also just looking at the couple in the foreground and how well they're dressed. And today it could have been fine on a 70-degree day, but a few days ago when it was 90 degrees, I can't imagine walking around the fairgrounds with all those layers of clothing. And so you can see it was just, when you came to the state fair, it was maybe once in your entire year that you would come to the Twin Cities. And so you would be dressed to the nines in order to be there. The Bee and Honey and Apiary building. So currently the Bee and Honey is in the egg court building, but it once had its own building. And you can see how they used a topiary as a beehive to entice people to come into the building in the background. And there's also a cage that you can see just behind the topiary that actually was where people would do bee beards and honey extractions, pretty similar to what's done today. Here's Reverend Francis Yeager on the right-hand side, and he was the superintendent of Bee and Honey for many years. And as you can see, he is just covered in bees, but he didn't use any protection because he knew how to take care of the bees and was very calm. And he was even able to convince a woman to let her daughters be covered in bees as well. And he was just very calm and telling them what to do, and neither of them got stung. And this is them taking a photo with them covered in bees, and that was published in the newspaper. Once again, here's the picture of the main or agricultural building, and you can see again how large it was. And if you pay attention to the area in pink, what happened was in 1944, it burned down. And that was in mid-November, and it took maybe 30 minutes to an hour. And they said embers could be seen for miles on end. And being that this was this fire happened during the war, they weren't able to build right away, simply due to funds and lack of resources. But in 1946, they were able to begin construction for the new egg court building. And we have our current egg court building there today, which was in the main's former footprint. Things that you can still see are produce on a large scale, for example, the large onion man and the huge cornucopia filled with vegetables. Again, it's just, these are all the things that Minnesota has to offer. And although visually it may have changed, we still are always about the best of the best and having a little bit of fun too. And here's an example of the egg court just looking from above. I love the radiating halls going into the rotunda, and then you have the large lit tower at night. So again, being that it's in the same footprint of the main building, we've had our agriculture has been mainstay at the State Fairgrounds since the very beginning and will always be a part. Henry Krabanoff from 1960. So he is an exhibitor that just really loved the fair. He participated in so many different categories that he was known, once again, as the Hay King, but he loved the fair so much that he even worked part-time as a ticket taker. He just, when summer came, it was all about the state fair for him. And the Nesvet brothers, this is in 1961. They have been exhibiting at the Minnesota State Fair since the early 1900s. And on the right-hand side is an example of what our competition's results would have looked like at that time. From the 1960s, it was categories that they won a lot of the commercial ears. And when they were, they still actually have a booth at the State Fair today on Machinery Hill. And one of the things that they were going to bring was this late 1800s planter. So they were going to show how to plant corn in the field. And George and Grace Antelick from 1972. So they are a couple that loves to do the seed and crop art, which started in 1965. And all the artwork on the back wall there is made out of the various seeds. A person who was very popular for her crop art is Lillian Colton. She's been on numerous television appearances and had books published about her, and her daughter still does demonstrations today. And here's the infamous pegboard that seems sparse in that 1986 photo, but is packed to the nines now. So it's definitely the biggest exhibit, I would say, at Egg Court currently, very popular and can reach a wide audience. We can't talk about agriculture without giving a nod to Machinery Hill. So here's an example of farm implements from 1906. You can see that Machinery Hill actually wasn't coined the phrase until about 1909. In 1907, we purchased 40 acres on the north end. And so we were able to have 80 acres of machinery. And so this was something that you would have seen in the early years. And then we also have example of Pioneer hybrid corn from 1941 and Ford tractors in 1947. And even in 1962, we had different exhibits that aren't necessarily about farm machinery. The area that's highlighted in red to the right-hand side is Man in Space exhibit because people were interested in going to the moon. And then we also have on the left-hand side by the grandstand, there's some blue overalls, the Lee overalls that flapped in the wind for many years. And you could even get a souvenir overalls, not quite as large, that were sewn in the grandstand. And, you know, the larger farm implements, tractors, combines, and things, you don't see that anymore simply for the fact that the companies just weren't making enough money as fewer and fewer farmers exist in the world. And because of that, it didn't make sense for them to bring these large implements that wouldn't be purchased at the state fair. And so in order to help fill that space, but still make it educational, is including things such as the little farm hands, and even like John Deere that used to have the huge farm tractors would now usually bring riding lawnmowers for your home. So you have to make changes with how the world is reacting, but we're always trying to give this educational component and learn something when you're coming to the fair. Now to animals with livestock and buildings. So here's a picture of the stock barns. Again, this is around 1904. And you can see the grandstand is different looking from the original from a few slides ago. So this is our second wooden grandstand. And with the stock barns, you can see how uneven the ground is and how sloped it is in order to bring your animals into those barns. And because of agriculture and livestock being so important for the fair, we wanted this grand livestock pavilion. So we ended up getting the Hippodrome, which was constructed in 1906. And this is looking around Langford Avenue, which is now Como Avenue. The stock barn that's in the foreground that says E on it, that actually is where the cattle barn is today. And you can see a little bit of the main building just behind the Hippodrome. One of the things that you would have seen back in the 1910s was this champion Belgian. So I wanted to show this photo because when you're coming to the state fair, you're always seeing the newest and best. And a Belgian, I don't know about you, but I always think of it as a tawny colored horse. But back then, a darker gray horse was the popular coloring. And so again, people's ideals and the shapes and the colors of what an animal, the perfect animal should be, changes through the years. Here's the interior of the Hippodrome from 1928. And I think it's just a beautiful building with all the light coming in, and you can see all the horses are on display with the judges in the center. And here's an example of the cattle barn. The cattle barn was built in 1920, so it's celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. It was designed by architect Clarence Johnston. He happened to design many of the buildings or mansions on Summit Avenue, including the Glensheen Mansion in Condon's Estate, in Duluth. And so I love that, you know, there's these beautiful homes and this beautiful cattle barn that they all have this connection. And you can see in the upper right-hand side, there's a mezzanine level. So it was originally built with that level that contained various exhibits, including the dairy department for a time. Now, this map in 1931 shows how the fairgrounds looked at the time. This was just before the Works Progress Administration, or WPA, came about. So if you see the crease on the bottom of the map, the streetcar terminals ends up getting cut in half, and then Judson Street, that now becomes Judson Avenue, is extended, and all these smaller stock barns are removed to build the permanent buildings that you know of today. As you can see with those, the streetcars cut in half, we now have the DNR building that was built, and then we also have our streetcar arch. And just a couple years later is when we have our new buildings. The swine barn was the first of the livestock buildings to be built during this time in 1936. And then we also have the horse barn and the poultry barn in 1937. And here's an example of 1937 looking down Judson Avenue. So now it is a true thoroughfare that you can walk all the way, and you can see the streetcar arch on the back side, which has now moved to the transit hub on the west end. And so this is how, you know, what you know of as Judson Avenue today, when there would be a lot of traffic of people. And then of course you take out your phone to see all the people as they're going down to the livestock area. An example of things that would happen during this time of the century was sheep shearing, which was started by the Farmers Magazine. And then we have the swine judging in 1941, very similar to what it is today, of having your swine on exhibit, that you're walking them around the arena with judge making comments. And, you know, during wartime, they were looking for more of a fatty animal, but now they're looking for a leaner animal. So again, what is going to be a winner one year might not be a winner the following year, but there's always something that you can be learning. But no livestock. So in World War II, affected the state fair just like everything else in life. Even before that, there was no auto racing because of gas rationing. But in 1943, the government took over the entire livestock area to create airplane propeller plant. In this map, you can see the highlighted area in gray is where everything was taken over. And so in 1943 and 44, there were no animals that were shown. And also the midway, that usually is on the south side of the grandstand, and, excuse me, also west, it was now to the east, that they moved it just east of the grandstand racetrack. If you remember the beautiful photo of the hippodrome with the horses, this is what it looked like during the war years. You can see it changed quite a bit. Here's the propane tank yard and swine barn in 1945. The swine barn was used as a shipping and receiving, and the propane tanks just out there, which are now where the beef cattle are housed at night. And here's the cattle barn in 1945, again for the propane propeller plant. The other buildings such as sheep and poultry, they were used for offices and also a cafeteria. The cattle barn after the war was able to be reconverted. And this is how it looked like in 1947, the first fair after the war. In 1945, we had to cancel the state fair because of transportation and gasoline rationing. But after the war was over, we could have been able to put on a fair, but there just wasn't enough time to do so. And so we were preparing in 1946 for our victory fair. But in 1946, the polio epidemic came about, and we only had 10 days of notice before the fair was canceled. And so we were planning that entire year to have that victory fair. So if you can imagine, as in 2020, we knew at the end of May that we weren't able to put on a fair to be safe for everybody. But we've had months and months to kind of understand that and kind of grieve and process it. But 10 days before a state fair in 1946, I cannot imagine. But you do what's best for the community and you push on. And obviously we have persevered since then. But again, when you're looking at the building for reconversion, the Hippodrome was not so lucky and had to be raised. And so in lieu of the Hippodrome, the construction of the new Hippodrome, now known as the Warner Coliseum, began. And 1949 was also the last time we had government appropriation, so we could build the Hippodrome, and we haven't had any government monies since. So we are self-supporting along with funds from the Minnesota State Fair Foundation that help keep our beautiful buildings structurally sound in the arts and history. So, the State Fair, we wanted to be around for many generations to come. And here is what the Hippodrome looked like the first year that light horse shows were back at the fair. So we had almost a decade of no horse shows being shown because without the Hippodrome, they didn't have a place to show off. So after the World War II, we had things like draft horses, but they were just exhibited outside of the horse barn for judging. So again, the 1940s was a really unusual time for people to come to the state fair. And now with competition, creative activities, education, and fine arts. So here's the Women's Building in 1905. And the Women's Building was a place to showcase women's work because it's very important. They have a huge part of working at their home just as anybody else. And so this shows what the best kind of quilts to make, different foods, things like that, things that you can bring home to your home life at the farm. They moved into this building in 1907. This originally was a steel and manufacturers building built in 1904. And this is where creative activities lies now. Things that you would see in the women's building are cooking school demos. This happens to be a meat exhibit that you could see. And other things to do, like as for competitions, is canning. Now this picture is from 1944. And again, as I noted with the livestock, that there was a lot of changes made. For 1940s, there was no baking exhibits because of food rationing, such as wheat and sugar. And the canning still went on, but it was different. Normally you enter 2 jars, one for canning, one for exhibit and the other for the judges to taste, as shown here. What this judge is tasting with a sterilized spoon because we only required one. So they would taste it and then reseal it. And then after the fair was over, you could pick up your jar and feed it to your family. So again, instead of 2, only 1 jar was needed. And then it was sterilized in order to not waste any food. And I think that's really incredible that, the State Fair made ways that we could still create different demonstrations and exhibits because we still wanted people to be a part of the fair. Arthur Schlegel in 1960s, so he often exhibited in the egg hort side and his wife baked, but he also started baking too. And around 1951 or 52, a women's building ended up changing to home activities because there was a lot of men that wanted to participate. And so by calling it home activities, it opened it up for everybody, which I feel like it should be. Exhibits we want everybody to participate if they're interested. And he really liked baking because he liked the science behind it, because it wasn't guessing, it was all about measuring, and he found it really important. So he and his wife started participating and entering competitions together. School exhibits, which is right by creative activities, is this is how it looked in 1941. The building is no longer there, but all the artwork is kind of salon style, where you can do your drawings or even papers and things. And again, it's just to showcase the educational components of what Minnesota children are learning. And then in the education building was created around, or the current one was built around 1965 and has been there since. Fine arts. Fine arts has been a part of the State Fair since the beginning, but the current show that you know of now didn't start until 1911. In 1887, roughly, an example of what you would see were not only loaned works, but painting on a shovel or taxidermy was considered a fine art category. This piece on the right-hand side is a hair wreath, and if you are unfamiliar with that, it would be taking locks of hair from usually family members or somebody you cared for, either a mourning or just because photography was not something that was common. And so this was a way to have a memorial of your family and loved ones. Giddings photography exhibit. So during the 1940s, the fine art show was held in the grandstand. And when they moved to the third floor of the grandstand in 1954, they celebrated by having shows, loaned works from Minneapolis Institute of Arts and also the Walker Art Center. And so you would see the Henri Matisse was shown here along with Gustave Courbet. In another year, we also had Pablo Picasso and Georgia O'Keeffe. So to have these major artists have their work shown at the State Fair is pretty special. In 1980, they moved from the grandstand to our current space today, where it's housed in the building that was built in 1904 and was originally the dairy building. And so the fine arts is very popular, where we have about 1,500 Minnesota artists participating every year, and of those 1,500, maybe 300 to 400 artworks are accepted. And so we were able to have a show this year as well. And again, anything that we can show to celebrate the riches of Minnesota and how special and talented we are, is just a wonderful thing that we can have that little bit of normalcy. Children at the fair, farm boys and girls, 4-H and FFA. So I think an important thing about having a state fair is, starting off young. When you're coming to the fair, it's a fun experience, but it's also educational. And I think if you start off early, you're going to continue on and then pass it on to what you've learned to your children, grandchildren, friends, you name it. So the Farm Boys Camp in 1912 was a way for rural boys to come to the fairgrounds. And oftentimes this was the first time they got on a train, left their town, and they would stay for the entirety of the state fair. And in order to earn their keep, they would be ushers at the grandstand in the Hippodrome. In 1916, actually, girls were allowed as well. And so the Farm Boys and Girls Camp were held on Machinery Hill. And this was the first camp that the building lasted till 1940. And then in 1941, this is where they were housed. This is the same type of building that was what the hangar is now. That was just a few years ago was the pet center. Boys and Girls Club, and I should say with the Farm Boys Camp, that actually lasted until the 1990s. And the reason why it changed was being an usher at a grandstand, it's kind of hard to tell somebody that you cannot smoke in the grandstand. And having a child say that, it just wasn't working the way grandstand performances changed. And so because of that, they decided to stop having the Farm Boys Camp, but we still have a scholarship in its place. And so now every year we give out 20 $1,000 scholarships for rural youth so they can do livestock and agriculture education in their college years. And so Boys and Girls Club work in 1912. In the early 1910s is when the Boys and Girls Club started in Minnesota and started participating at the State Fair. And here's an example of canning demonstrations. And this is a demonstration from 1918 of Liberty bread. So as I've been talking about World War II, World War I, or the Great War, was no exception. They wanted to ration the wheat so it could go to the military. And so this was an example of how to make bread made out of potatoes and also potato water. And so I think it's just very interesting that even from the very beginning, we've been trying to do this educational component. The 4-H building was built in 1938-39 and completed in 1940. And you have 3 levels, the main for exhibits, and then the second and third are the cafeteria and the sleeping quarters. Prior to this building, you would actually sleep in University of Minnesota dormitories. Again, because this is a part of the University of Minnesota Extension, and so it makes a lot of sense. But again, being that we're so close, it's just that wonderful thing to have. So we'll see all the different types of like cooking demonstrations on the main floor, and clothing, cabinetry, and then the kids who are showing their animals will go down to the livestock area, such as for the 4-H land leads. So in 1976, all these girls are with their sheep, and they're all wearing wool. And it's about not only knowing your animal, but knowing what the animal can produce. And so not only are the girls wearing wool outfits, but some of the sheep are as well. Wool on wool, as I like to think of it. FFA Children's Barnyard came in 1956. FFA came later than the Farm Boys Camp and 4-H. So they came around mid-century to the State Fair. And FFA is Future Farmers of America. And one of their popular exhibits was the Children's Barnyard, which is kind of like a petting zoo. You might recognize the exterior of the barnyard as today's Care 11 booth. And one of the popular contests was the FFA rooster crowing contest. And so this was outside of the barnyard, and it was a way to get your rooster to crow so many times within about 20 minutes or so. And whichever rooster crowed the most in that time period moved to the finals at the end of the fair. And you can egg your rooster on, I guess pun intended, in order to, as you can do anything to make them crow, but you can't touch them. And it's really a fun contest that you can see today. I'm really looking forward to seeing that in 2021. It's just something that, you know, it's not an everyday thing. So it's just really enjoyable to see. Safe Tractor Driving Contest in 1970s. This is a contest that has lasted for decades. It still goes on today, but not nearly as popular as it did in its heyday. There would be maybe 70 or 80 kids that were lined up to basically do different maneuvers with your tractor without trying to tip over poles that had golf balls on it. So to me, I think about if I was doing a driver's ed course and having all these random people watching me, it would be very stressful. So I give the kids a lot of kudos for doing that. And now the Carnival Midway. So here's the Mary Pike in 1904. The 1904 was the first time they had any type of carnival all set in one space. They kind of wanted it off to the side because the people weren't necessarily sure that they wanted to have a carnival. So talking about carnival, but I'm showing you the lagoon from 1909. This area you can see is looking east and the grandstand is in the background. The lagoon, there was a lot of water that was in that area, kind of the swampy space near like the transportation area between University of Minnesota and the State Fairgrounds. And because we had this space, they thought, what can we do to work with it? And they decided to create a Venice at the State Fair. So they made these gondola and canal rides. And their idea was to have all this space. They started dredging all these canals, but they didn't think about the soil underneath, and the deeper that they went, it was a sandy soil and the water just went straight down. And so that didn't last for very long. It was maybe about 1909 to 1913 before they gave that up. So they went back to a standard midway. And in 1933, Royal American shows came about. And one of the things that they brought was the 4 Ferris wheels in a row, which was the first Ferris wheels 4 to be shown at any state fair. And here's an example of what the Midway looked like in 1969, again with Royal American. And they definitely had sideshows back then. In 1995, the State Fair took over, and now we are the Mighty Midway, in which we contract different rides and games. So it's something that we choose, and it's still, the lights and the games delight people to this day. Now, grandstand entertainment with horse and auto races, thrills, and fireworks. So this is a show, this is a picture of Dan Patch. Dan Patch is in the center of the photograph, and he is the horse that basically the grandstand built. So he is a pacer, and in 1906, he did a mile in 1 minute, 55 seconds, which is a world record. And a pacer is unlike a trotter, because not only is the pacer carrying a man in a sulky, but a pacer has a different gait. A trotter is the standard, when you're seeing a horse when it's a trot or a gallop. But a pacer, you're using, it's basically if you put your right arm and your right leg up at the same time, almost like marionettes. And so it's a very unusual gait. And it's just very interesting to know. And like, if you've ever tried walking like that, I recommend it because it's so odd. So it just gives me much more appreciation for what Dan Patch was able to do. He was world known, very popular. And as you know, Dan Patch Avenue, we named our street after this horse in 1995, but he's really had a presence at the fair for many, many years. Horse races, here's an example of a different horse race that we had in the 1920s. But our last horse races were ended in 1949 because we had a different horsepower that was popular, which was auto racing. The first auto race, I believe, was in 1907, if I remember correctly. And we were on a dirt track for a mile, and then half-mile dirt track in 1939. And then we moved to an asphalt track around 1965. As the years, there used to be auto races every day, but as the time went by, it only went to Labor Day. And because of all the changes that would have needed to be made, it would have been millions of dollars to make those changes. And for one day, it just didn't seem feasible. And so in 2002 was the last of the auto races. Other things that happened at the grandstand was political pontificating, such as Teddy Roosevelt was here in 1910, but he was also here in 1901 when he did the Speak Softly and Carry a Big Stick speech, which was known as the Minnesota speech. The grandstand marquee, here it is in 1910, and you can see the pageant of nations tonight. If you look at the marquee today, it says the grandstand dates and then see a grandstand show. But for many, many decades, the same show was every night. And the example for pageant of nations, this is what one of the shows would have been. So they had areas like Japan, Germany. There was over 600 to 700 people that were acting in this play. And so you had a lot of different backdrops, people in costume and fireworks. We also had day shows as well. So here's Lillian Boyer doing aerial acrobatics in the 1920s. And so she has just left the car, and then she is climbing up the ladder to go onto the airplane. Here's another night show, Last Days of Pompeii. So this is showing the volcano of Mount Vesuvius going over the city of Pompeii. So there's a lot of fireworks involved. Locomotive crash in 1934. So this was in the grandstand infield, and two locomotives coming together crashing. Perfect analogy for the Great Depression. So it's a lot of the that tension that you have in your real life, but more of an entertainment type, just to get that aggression out when you're at the state fair, but in a way to forget it, but still have an enjoyable time. Children's Day. So we had children's matinees. And so here in 1937, there are a lot of kids that are just filled to the brim in the grandstand. And so they would have different vaudeville and thrill show acts that were catered just to the kids, which was great because then it left the parents to go out and about and do things that, you know, were more interest to them. In 1962 is when we knew, when the grandstand entertainment changed and was called big name acts. And so we had Dennis Day, Jane Russell, and Jimmy Dean perform that year. Other examples of big names is the Supremes in 1966, and then Alabama in 1991. And they have performed at the fair more than any other group with 19 times. Now to free entertainment, music, and activities. So here's Sousa at the Plaza Bandstand in 1927. So, you know, Stars and Stripes Forever, he performed the Minnesota March for the first time at the State Fair. And so he performed first at the grandstand and then also the plaza. And this is right outside of the grandstand, east of the grandstand ramp. Marching bands in the parade. This is from 1970. We've had marching bands going around the state fairgrounds for many, many years, sometimes performing in front of the grandstand, sometimes performing actually in the original Hippodrome. But the grandstand, or excuse me, the parade now happens at 2 p.m. every day. And seeing the marching bands is my favorite because they're competing with one another. And if you're by the administration building, that's where they're being judged. So that's the best of the best. And the University of Minnesota also comes once during the fair to perform, and they're not competing, they're just here just to have a great time with the fair guests. And at the end of it, they meet around the International Bazaar and play a lot of different University of Minnesota marches. And it's I was able to experience it the first time last year, and it was incredible. I highly recommend it, and that's certainly something I'm going to miss this year. Fairchild, so he is our state fair mascot. He is a gopher, and he came about first in 1966. And then his nephew Fairchild came in 1983, and they've been creating fun and chaos ever since. Back to the International Bazaar, it was originally known as the Mexican Village, built in 1970. And then a few years later became the Bazaar, and then completely renovated to a whole new space with a little bit larger as the International Bazaar in, I believe, 2008. And it welcomed different nationalities and programs throughout the world. And so that is a really wonderful place to find different music and wares and food. And for free stages, certainly the bandshell, which was built in 1971, is the largest for free entertainment. As people have changed, not again with less farmers and things like that, we had to create different spaces to bring more people in. And so, you know, with the band shell was instantly popular. You can see the various musicians that sometimes end up going to perform at the grandstand, and sometimes people performing at the grandstand end up at the band shell. And so going to these types of places, the State Fair is a place for everybody. Not only can you see that show, but you can learn how to cook a meal at one of the many places on the fairgrounds. You can pet animals, you can see an animal give birth. You know, there's so many educational components, but it's a state fair. We love fun, we love people having a great time. And just like this, at the end, if you stay long enough, you're there for fireworks. So with that, I want to thank you for being a part of this talk, and I hope you learned some things and enjoyed your time. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Keri. That was so fun. I learned a ton. And I even already saw your slides, so that was extra fun. All right, so I know Sarah has been kind of tracking the questions that have come in, so I'll let Sarah turn her video on. And Sarah, let us know what questions folks have.
Yeah, we've got a few good ones. And yeah, thanks, Keri. I have learned so much about the fair. It's really fun for me to see just how long. I have some very passionate family members about the fair, that people who, you know, go all 12 days. And it's fun to see that it's gone way back to the beginning, that people have always had this passion. So first question from our good friend Steve. He is wondering when the State Fair got permanent year-round staff.
Oh, that's a good question. I've never been asked that before. You know, if I really don't know. I will have to get back to you on that. I'm trying, because we have about 80 full-time staff now, you know, but as the years went on, we are now 12 days. Some of the fairs were only 3 days long. Some were then became 6 days, then 8, 10, a few years of 11, and then 12. So, you know, I think as the different types of the logistics of planning a state fair has changed, that we couldn't be a part-time, that ended up being full-time. But that is a very interesting question. And that's the thing about working here in the archives. I learn new things all the time. And that's what's so fun. So if you get that, Steve, if I get your information, I'll be sure to look that up for you, and then I'll get back to you.
Yeah, we see Steve on a regular basis, so we can fill him in on that. Sarah had a really great question. She says that she used to be able to see hot air balloons from her house, and she's wondering if hot air balloon races used to occur at the fairgrounds.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm laughing because we did have hot air balloon races like in the 1980s. Jerry Hammer, our general manager, kind of sort of got into a hot air balloon once that ended up crashing into a golf course. So he is a much better storyteller than I am for it, because it happened to him. But yes, it happened in the 1980s. And we also had blimps earlier than that, and even a hot air balloon in the grandstand in the 1920s. And then there was a marriage that was live on radio through KSDP. I think the reason that the hot air balloons don't go on anymore is because of, for one, security with grandstand performances. There's a lot more, everything has gotten smaller. Because before then, we still had a racetrack, and so you had that infield that you could set up all those hot air balloons, but the space isn't that way anymore, because a lot of the infield was cut in order to create the transit hub on the west end and extra parking. And so unfortunately, it's just too small in order to do something like that safely nowadays.
I could only imagine the chaos that would ensue with hot air balloons at the State
Yeah.
Fair. It definitely makes sense seeing how much more sparse and spread out things used to be. I was wondering this as well. Somebody is wondering, I saw a lot of pictures of cars actually on the streets at the fair. When did they stop letting people actually drive their cars on the roads, like into the fair?
Surprisingly, well, to me, it just seems like the other day, but 1991 was the last year of parking on the fairgrounds. They actually started around late 1960s, maybe early 1970s, of decreasing parking, even from, it basically, they started cutting it from the south to the north end. The north end has always been more of the quiet area with Machinery Hill. And because, so they were able to keep parked cars up there for a longer amount of time. But I remember as a kid kind of going in there with my parents or my aunts and uncles, trying to find a parking spot, you know, in the main part of the fairgrounds. And so it's a lot harder to, I can't imagine being able to try to get a car in here today with, you know, about 130,000 people a day, sometimes over 250,000 a day. Just, it's hard enough trying to navigate just with people, that if there were cars coming in and out. So, and also surprisingly, the park and ride system started in 1975 with one lot, and now it's up to 33. So that's a huge thing that we've done, is trying to get people to park far away, and then I'll bus them to the State Fair.
Okay, it looks like we have a couple of questions about food, which I anticipated. So first question is, have there always been food vendors at the fair?
Yes, you know, types of foods from the very beginning were very simple, you know, maybe some popcorn, caramel apples, things like that. It wasn't really a place to, it wasn't about food focused when you were coming to the fair, but for many years, like 1897, the Hamlin Church Dining Hall started, and they've been a part of the State Fair ever since, which is fantastic. For many years, decades, the type of food you would have would be a sit-down restaurant or a church dining hall. The dining halls were volunteer-based, and so with that, and a lot of the food was made outside of the fairgrounds, and so they would bring it. And just the way, I don't know the specifics of how the food laws and things like that, but through the years, the dining halls just started going away. And in 1947, the Pronto Pup was debuted at the State Fair, and that was really like the first food on a stick. And so it was like, hey, we can eat and look at things. And it clearly hasn't stopped, because we have about 300 vendors now for food, with over 500 different things to eat. So, you know, the food at the State Fair definitely goes hand in hand with your overall experience. But it's a lot of, you know, going to this place and that. Of course, you can bring your own food as well, but I figure, you know, you have 12 days of fun, that you should try to eat what we have to offer. And we're also trying to try and bring back the different foods that you can grow in Minnesota. For example, a couple years ago at the Cambria Kitchen and Creative Activities, there was, they showed, and unfortunately the name escapes me, but they made a pesto made out of hemp, and it was so delicious. And I keep thinking about that. And, you know, they have like the Minnesota cooks and different things like at the Progress Center, and how to cook from your garden and things like that. So, some of the food I've noticed have changed these past couple years, and it'll be interesting to see what it looks like in a few decades.
Yeah, it'll especially be interesting to see if anything creeps in next year from all of the big craze around gardening and growing your own food and knowing where your food comes from. It'll be interesting to see if there's influences as the years go.
Yeah, and obviously, I'm sure many of the people here, when I read about the pride of, your farm and things like that, this is the first year I grew tomatoes, and I tell people about, I got tomatoes. I was so excited, and I just have this little spot. And so, I think that's what's so special about the state fair, is that you can learn all these different things. You can learn how to garden. You can learn how to make food out of the different vegetables and fruits that grow in Minnesota, and how to make it better. And I totally appreciate that. And there's just so much I wish I could see during fair time, that, there's a lot to learn here. You just have to open your eyes to see what's available.
Yeah. And sort of you started to answer, or you answered part of this question, I guess, still on the food train, is when sort of did the food to eat, sort of like we're at a place and we have to eat out of necessity, turn more into like food on a stick, or sort of this like entertainment wow factor? And you mentioned the Pronto Pup in 1947. But I guess along with that, there's another question about like Sweet Martha's, World's Best French Fries, mini apple pie, things like that.
I think, Sweet Martha's came around, and I think 1971 was when she came to the fair. Ironically, she actually was supposed to be, she wanted to have frozen yogurt, but frozen yogurt was something that was already about. And so it was, what would your second choice be? And she said cookies. And it was just a fluke that she wrote down cookies, and that's how it began. What I've learned from her, which is really ingenious, is that a way for her to get advertising is putting her cookies in a cone, because you can't rest the cookies anywhere. You have to hold it. And so when you're holding this, everybody sees it. Where'd you get that? Sweet Martha's. And then that really bloomed. Mini donuts, it was around 1949 that mini donuts came about. But from my understanding, it was in the 1990s that there was a national newscast that talked about food. And then that's really when it came off, like, oh, if I get somebody to talk about my food, then my concession will get its name out there. And so, we have a media kit that goes out every year, and people just want to know about the new foods. And so it's always something that is worked on each year as to, the vendors are creating different foods. It's, people want to see what the next thing is. But yeah, I would definitely say the 1990s is kind of when the food craze just went up as one of the attractions for the fair.
Yeah. Transitioning now to another topic, we have a couple of questions about this actually. So the sort of broad topic is if the state fair has always been open to everyone. So first wondering if Black farmers or people of color really in general were invited to participate throughout the state fair's history. And then we also have a question about women farmers.
Well, I think for me, what is interesting is we don't have information of minorities necessarily being a part of the state fair. I have noticed, unfortunately, in photos, it is very Caucasian centric. However, I do know that they're in either in the late 1800s or the early 1900s, we had a Black photographer or African-American photographer who a prize was to get photography by him. And so that was a huge I'm sorry, words escape me. It was a huge accomplishment to get that award. And so there were also a few concessions that were at the state fair. There was a barbecue, a man who had a barbecue stand in Minneapolis. He had a concession at the state fair. I know I would like to see more for sure. And it's something that, we have learned from the past and what can we do to make it better. I think, especially in this time period, we all want to be better. And again, we've always wanted people to feel accepted at the state fair. We want people, any race, nationality, to come to the state fair and even talk about in creative activities, like what type of foods can we bring that, to show different nationalities. We want to be all encompassing. And so if this helps, if this create, even for the person who's gardening in their backyard, you don't have to have a farm to participate at the state fair. You can show your vegetables here. I think that would be fantastic. And if you have any interest in, joining 4-H, contact the University of Minnesota Extension. Have your children show at the school exhibits at the state fair. Enter in the fine arts. There's so many different ways for you to participate at the state fair. And again, it would just be fantastic to have a wider range of people. It really would. And if you have friends, please encourage them to do so, because that is what we want. We've had talks about it, that it can take decades for people to come into the state fairgrounds, in terms of the diversity. And so it is something that we've been working on for years. Mm-hmm. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, I think we had another question actually from Anna, TGA Anna. She was wondering if you know when the first female farmer was sort of showcased or debuted at the fair. I know it was fairly early on that they had the women's building, which, makes sense. They were sort of showcasing women's work. But Minnesota has there actually has been a shift in our farming community that we're moving more towards the majority of farms being led by women. So I'm curious if you know about when female farmers joined.
That is also something I really don't know offhand. I know that for many years, it certainly was a male centric organization. And I do know, I think in 1912, there was, I'm trying to, unfortunately, her name escapes me, but I know that there have been competitions for women from the very beginning. As to the specifics as to what they entered, I cannot say, just because I don't know offhand. I can look at our annual reports to see if I recognize name, whether it's a male or female. But it's, again, I don't think we have any specifics as to how many men enter, how many women enter, things like that. So it's kind of more of a broader question that I just don't know if I can answer, but I'll certainly try. And again, I'll look into it, I promise.
Great. I'll stay along this sort of vein of questions. We have a question about if the fair has ever considered incorporating more Minnesota-based Native American history into programming, I know that I have seen demonstrations and things like that, but how that relationship has looked over the years.
Yes, the state fair for sure, and unfortunately, and one of the things with the hemp pesto, and the name is escaping me. I'm so sorry. But we just had with Minnesota cooks, we've had Native American pride dancers at International Bazaar. And again, I'm so terrible. I feel terrible for not remembering, but one of the things in the Minnesota marquees on the north end have several different areas that give gratitude to the Native Americans that are from Minnesota. I'm certainly aware that, I have this, honestly, I think about how the State Fair has a huge history in Minnesota and how it brought people into the Minnesota territory and how that changed the landscape. And, it's hard for me to grasp that, that we are a part of that. And I just hope that we can make things better and better. The Native American pride dancers are in International Bazaar. We have the Minnesota cooks that show the different foods that are at the, that are native to Minnesota. There's a lot of different things that also happen at the State Fair that I just don't know necessarily what goes on. But, again, there's always things that we can improve on. And if there's something that you think that would be great for the State Fair, I highly recommend sending an email to the fair info and just, say, this is what we would really like to see. We take these things absolutely seriously. And so I think that would be really fantastic. If you have any ideas, please share, because the State Fair, again, it's about all of us. We want everybody to feel like they're welcome here and that they're able to learn and that they feel represented, and we want that.
Yeah, and I know you apologize for not remembering some things, but I am just baffled by all of the knowledge that you seem to have crammed into your brain with, it seems like, there's literally hundreds of years of information here. So I think most people are probably impressed with that. But shifting gears, we have a question about, I'm not sure, I don't know about this, but maybe this will make sense to you. The house, wondering what the house what it's used for, the one that's way up by the hangar,
Yes, that actually was built in 1915 as a model farmhouse, and that was created by a women's organization. Again, I cannot remember the name of it, but it was built as a farmhouse, and you could buy pamphlets in order to build your own house. I think it was about $5 or so. And so you would walk through this house. It later became a year-round residence for the general manager of the State Fair. And so because for a while, in order to be the general manager, you lived on the fairgrounds. The Bailey House that is currently the State Fair Foundation headquarters once was officers' quarters for board members during fair time. And year-round, that became the greenhouse residence, because with the greenhouse, there was heating all year round. And so it was basically for fire safety to make sure nothing wrong happened. Since, I would say, the 1980s, the house back by the hangar or in the water tower has become different areas. I forget exactly, I think there's operators who do fair information during the State Fair are housed there now. So it isn't a living quarters any longer.
And then also wondering, Keri is wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about the Space Needle and maybe the history behind that.
Yes, the Space Tower was built in 1964 64 or 65. I always forget between Space Tower and the Sky Glider. And so that, I believe all those, it came in different compartments that was brought from Duluth down to the Twin Cities. And that space actually, originally when it was built, it was kind of like a circular plot of land. And then there was a road that went all the way around it. I think what I really like about the Space Tower is that it's quite the icon. Like you can see it from far away, like, okay, that's where the State Fair is. It rotates as it goes up, and then you can see for miles both of the Twin Cities. And it's a really nice ride if you haven't been on it before. It's pretty impressive how far you can see through the fairgrounds and beyond. So I hope that helps with the answer. They painted a few different colors through the years. A few years ago, I happened to be walking around during the summertime, and firefighters were using it as a practice to climb down the Space Tower as if they were on the cliffs of St. Paul. And that was really impressive. So, it's interesting to see how things get used off season.
Yeah. And then one last question before we wrap up here, and it's going to be just right on time. Somebody wondering if there's ever been any political protests at the fair.
Political protests, I think for a few years, once in a while, there's been some not necessarily wonderful news between the Democrat and the Republican headquarters. I think people have heard some bad things said from one another. We don't like to dwell on any of those things because, again, the State Fair, we want people to come here and feel accepted and feel welcomed. That's what we're about. And we don't want to focus on anything that has happened negatively. It's just not something that we want to do. We always want people to come here to feel good. And that is certainly our priority. And so if there has been anything that's happened, it's just not something that we want to focus on because we want people to feel happy and learn and have education here. And again, I hope everybody feels that way when they come to the State Fair.
Yeah. Oh, and I guess we have one last question here that I missed. Is wondering how long the all-you-can-drink milk stand has been going on for.
I think that's happened at least since the 1950s, maybe earlier than that. Kind of coincides with like the Princess Kay of the Milky Way. She started in 1954 and has been going on ever since. So I think certainly around 1940s, if not 1950s, if not a bit earlier. And I can look at that for official numbers that I'm happy to email you for that.
Great. I don't see any other questions, and I'll sort of pass it off to you to close out.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Sarah. All right, thanks again, Keri, and thanks everybody for attending. If you have any questions for us or for Keri, Keri's really busy, even though it's not an active fair year. She said she's been running around kind of giving presentations and participating in some of the great events that the fair is managing to do this year, even though they're limited by COVID. So, but we'll do our best to answer if you have any more questions. We're also always interested in your feedback about these virtual events. This is only our second Discover event. So we hope that you guys come back for many more. Next month, September, we're kind of in the works planning an Apple related event since Apple season is coming on strong. So, all right. Thanks so much, Keri. We hope to connect with you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you
Have
for
a good night,
having
everybody.
me.
You're so welcome. Bye, everyone.